Ever feel like sending money in today's world is, I don't know, just way more complicated than it needs to be?
Oh, definitely.
I mean, we stream movies instantly, but sending cash, especially across borders, it's often slow, full of these hidden fees, and you need permission from like all sorts of middlemen.
Yeah.
What if there was a digital way to do it? Like setting value just as easily as an email, almost free, anywhere, without needing anyone's okay.
Well, that frustration you're talking about, that's pretty much the spark behind Bitcoin.
Ah.
So welcome to this deep dive. We're going to try and unravel the fundamentals of Bitcoin today. It's the original decentralized digital currency. You asked us to make sense of it, and that's what we're aiming for.
Okay, great. Now, I know for a lot of people, when they hear Bitcoin, maybe their mind jumps to like super complex tech blockchain stuff. Maybe it feels a bit mysterious.
Sure, that's common.
And yeah, the tech behind it is really innovative, no doubt. But the good news, I think, is you don't actually need to be a coding genius to get the basics or even use it. Think about it, right? You use your smartphone all the time, but do you need to understand all the physics and engineering inside it? Probably not. Bitcoin's kind of similar that way.
That's a great analogy. And it really is remarkable how much Bitcoin has moved from the fringes into the mainstream conversation.
Yeah.
More and more people are starting to see its unique qualities, the potential it holds. It's definitely not just some flash in the pan.
Right. So in this deep dive, we're hitting the big questions using the material you shared. First, what is Bitcoin really at its core? Second, and maybe this is the bigger one, why should you care? Why use it? What problem does it actually solve?
Yeah, the why is crucial.
And then finally, we'll just touch on the basics of how to get started. So let's dive into part one. What exactly is this Bitcoin thing?
Okay. So in its simplest form, Bitcoin is a decentralized digital currency. Think of it like digital cash or maybe digital gold that exists purely online. It lets you send value directly from one person to another anywhere in the world. And that word decentralized, that's key. It operates without any central authority.
Right, independent. The material we looked at actually called it an independent, global, and public ledger. Let's break that down. Independent, what does that really mean for someone using it?
It means no single entity, no government, no bank, no big corporation controls Bitcoin or can, manipulate it. It just exists outside that traditional financial system.
Okay.
If you think about it, there have been times when governments or banks have, say, frozen accounts or put restrictions on things. Bitcoin, because it's independent, isn't really subject to those same kinds of controls.
Okay, that makes sense. Not tied to one power. And global, how does that independence help make it global?
Well, because it's not tied down to any specific country or financial institution, anyone, anywhere with an internet connection can potentially use it. It allows for really fast and generally cheap transactions, 247 across borders. Imagine sending money to family overseas, and it arrives almost instantly with hardly any fees. That's the power of its global nature, which stems from being independent.
Yeah, that's a huge difference from, old school international transfers. Definitely. Okay, now, public ledger. That sounds a bit like everything's out in the open. How does that work with privacy?
Yeah, it's an interesting balance, actually. All the Bitcoin transactions, they get permanently recorded on this shared transparent ledger. It's called the blockchain.
Right.
This makes the whole system incredibly secure and auditable. Anyone can technically look at the transactions. But the identities of the people behind those transactions aren't necessarily public.
Oh.
You're identified by a digital address, like a string of characters, not by your name, so it's anonymous in that sense. It gives you a level of privacy while still keeping the overall system transparent.
Gotcha.
And this whole ledger is secured using cryptography, which makes it basically impossible to change past records.
So the transactions are visible, but the people are mostly private.
Okay.
That's clever. Now, the security aspect is huge. How does it stay secure if there's no central bank watching over it?
Its security really comes from advanced cryptography and math.
Okay.
The network itself, all the users around the world, they collectively verify and confirm every single transaction. This distributed agreement or consensus makes it extremely hard to tamper with or counterfeit. Our current financial system relies a lot on laws and regulations, right? Which sometimes have loopholes or can change. Bitcoin's security is built into its code. It's based on math.
That's a pretty fundamental difference. And then there's the limited supply thing. only 21 million Bitcoins ever. Why is that such a big deal?
Right. That limited supply creates what people call digital scarcity. It's a bit like gold or other precious metals. Because there's only a finite amount, it can potentially act as a hedge against inflation. Think about it. If demand for Bitcoin goes up over time, but the supply stays fixed, the value, in theory, tends to rise.
Right. Unlike regular currency where more can just be printed.
Exactly. If something's constantly being created, its value can get diluted. A fixed supply resists that.
And that statistic from the material was pretty wild.
Yeah.
Even owning just one single Bitcoin puts you in a tiny percentage globally.
Yeah, it's quite something. But of course, you don't need a whole Bitcoin. You can buy tiny fractions. They're called Satoshis.
Satoshis, right.
So it's divisible, which makes it accessible. But that underlying scarcity is fundamental to how it's designed.
Okay, so I think we're getting a handle on what Bitcoin is. This independent, global digital money with a public, secure ledger and a limited supply. Now, let's get to the core of it. Why should someone listening actually care? Why use it? What problems does it solve?
Yeah, this is where those characteristics turn into real benefits for, everyday people. Our research points out several key advantages. First off, those fast global payments we mentioned.
Right.
Transfers can happen really quickly, sometimes in seconds or minutes, potentially making Bitcoin the first truly efficient global currency.
And the fees. The material mentioned extremely low transaction fees. You even said they're kind of voluntary. That's totally different from the charges you get hit with traditionally, especially sending money overseas.
Exactly. I mean, sometimes if the network is really busy, fees might go up a bit to get your transaction prioritized, but generally they are much, much lower and way more transparent than what banks often charge.
Yeah, that's a game changer for anyone sending money abroad.
No.
Okay, what else? Security.
Yep. Enhanced security. Because it's secured by cryptography, it's essentially impossible to counterfeit. The material highlighted this contrast. Our current system relies on laws, which can have flaws, while Bitcoin security is based on, math that's incredibly hard to break.
Okay.
And that inherent security leads to another big plus.
Yeah.
You don't need to trust third parties.
Like banks or payment processors.
Exactly. Bitcoin allows for direct person-to-person payments. It puts you more in control of your money without worrying about an intermediary denying a transaction or charging high fees.
Control is definitely a big theme here. And what about that anonymous yet transparent thing? How's that a benefit?
Well, it offers privacy because you don't necessarily have to link your real-world identity to your Bitcoin address to use the network. But at the same time, the transparency of that public ledger means everything is verifiable. It prevents bad actors from, say, spending the same money twice or creating fake Bitcoins. It's this unique combo of privacy and accountability.
Interesting. And like the internet, it's decentralized. No single boss. The material suggested this makes it more fair. How does that work?
Because the rules of Bitcoin are set by the consensus of its users, not by a single company or government, it's much harder for any one entity to censor transactions they don't like or manipulate the system for their own gain. It makes it really resilient.
Right, no single point of failure or control.
Exactly.
And finally, we circle back to that limited supply potentially protecting against inflation.
Precisely. In a world where central banks can, create more money, potentially lowering the value of your savings over time, Bitcoin's fixed supply offers a different model. Some people see it as a digital store of value, kind of like digital gold.
Okay, so it's a different way to think about holding on to value long term.
It offers a different way to think about holding and transferring wealth in this digital age, one that isn't necessarily subject to the same inflationary pressures.
Okay, so the why is becoming clearer. Faster, cheaper global payments, strong security, more control, some privacy, resilience through decentralization, and that potential inflation hedge. Now, the part that might seem the trickiest, how do you actually get started?
Right. It can seem a bit daunting at first, but like our research pointed out, it can actually be pretty straightforward. There are basically 4 main steps people usually follow.
Okay, let's walk through them first. Create a Bitcoin wallet. What is that exactly? Is it like a physical wallet?
Not usually. Think of it more like a digital app or maybe a small device. Its job is to manage your Bitcoin. And the really crucial thing is it holds your keys.
Keys.
Yeah, your private key and your public key. The public key is like your email address or maybe your bank account number. You can share it freely with people so they can send you Bitcoin.
Okay.
Your private key, though, that's like your password or your PIN, it gives you access to spend your Bitcoin. You must keep this secret. Super important.
Right. Guard the private key. Because if you lose that...
If you lose your private key, you lose access to your Bitcoin, period.
Mm.
There's no central help desk to call, no password recovery. That's part of the responsibility that comes with control.
Wow. Okay, so what kinds of wallets are there?
There are several types, mainly trading off convenience versus security. Online wallets, often called web wallets or exchange wallets, are frequently provided when you sign up on a crypto exchange.
Okay, like on the marketplace itself.
Yeah, they're convenient for beginners, maybe for small amounts. But for holding larger amounts or for longer periods, the research strongly recommends using a hardware wallet.
A hardware wallet, what's that?
It's a physical device, kind of like a USB stick, that stores your private keys completely offline. This makes it much harder for hackers to get to them. Think of it like keeping your gold bars in a vault instead of your pocket.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
Okay, step 2. Get your first Bitcoin. How do you actually buy some?
Well, the most common way, and usually the easiest for most people starting out, is to buy Bitcoin on a cryptocurrency exchange.
Right, those online marketplaces.
Exactly. Think of it like a stock exchange, but for digital currencies. You sign up, often verify your identity, that's the Know Your Customer or KYC process, and then you can buy Bitcoin using your regular currency.
Okay. Are there other ways?
Yeah, you could potentially earn Bitcoin, maybe sell goods or services and accept Bitcoin as payment. And then there's Bitcoin mining that involves using powerful computers to help secure the network, and in return, you get rewarded with new Bitcoin. But that's generally less accessible for beginners these days. It requires specialized hardware and technical know-how.
So for most people, buying on a reputable exchange is the way to go first.
Yeah, that's usually the recommended starting point.
Okay, step 3 was secure your Bitcoins. We talk about hardware wallets, but what else is involved here? Seems critical.
It absolutely is. Once you've bought Bitcoin on an exchange, the general advice is to move it off the exchange and into your own secure wallet, especially if it's more than a small amount or you plan to hold it for a while.
Why move it off the exchange?
Because if your Bitcoin stays on the exchange, technically, they control the private keys, not you. While good exchanges have strong security, they can still be targets for hackers or face regulatory issues or even go bankrupt.
No, please.
The whole point of Bitcoin really is self-custody being your own bank. So there's a saying in the community, not your keys, not your coins.
Got it. Move it to your own wallet, preferably a hardware one for bigger amounts, to have true control. Makes sense. And the last step, send and receive Bitcoin.
Yeah.
How does that work in practice?
You know, the best way to learn is just by doing it. Maybe start by sending a tiny amount between 2 wallets you control just to see how it works.
Okay.
To receive Bitcoin, you just need to share your public Bitcoin address, that long string of letters and numbers, with the person sending it to you. Never, ever share your private key.
Right, only the public address.
Yeah. And many wallets now generate QR codes for your public address, which makes it super easy. Someone can just scan it with their phone.
Oh yeah, QR codes simplify everything.
Definitely. And remember, Bitcoin is highly divisible. You don't have to send a whole Bitcoin. You can send tiny fractions, those Satoshis we mentioned.
And can you actually, like, buy coffee with it? Is
Yeah.
it becoming more common to pay for things?
It is growing, yeah. The number of merchants and services accepting Bitcoin is definitely increasing. To send a payment, you'd basically open your wallet app, put in the recipient's address, or scan their QR code, type in the amount, and hit send.
And it's fast.
Usually quite fast, yes. For larger transactions, though, it's wise to wait for a few network confirmations. This is the network verifying the transaction multiple times to make absolutely sure it's final and irreversible. The standard advice is often to wait for about 6 confirmations for significant amounts.
6 confirmations for big stuff. Got it. Okay,
Yeah.
Those are the basic steps. The material also really hammered home some important security points. What are the absolute must-knows?
Yeah, security is paramount in this space. It's crucial to understand that while the Bitcoin network itself is incredibly secure due to its math and decentralization, the risks often come from how we interact with it. User error is a big one.
Okay, like what?
First, remember, Bitcoin transactions are irreversible. Once you send it, it's gone. Like handing someone physical cash. There's no undo button, no bank to call to reverse it. So always double check the recipient's address before you send.
Good advice. What else?
Be aware of the privacy aspect. While you don't need to give your name to use Bitcoin, if your Bitcoin address ever gets publicly linked to your real-world identity, maybe through an exchange where you did KYC, then potentially your transaction history could be traced. It's pseudo-anonymous, not completely anonymous.
Yeah.
Pseudo-anonymous.
And as we've said a couple of times now, hardware wallets really are the safest way to store any significant amount of Bitcoin long-term. Keep those private keys offline.
Right.
Finally, just be cautious. There are thousands of different cryptocurrencies out there now and tons of exchanges. Not all are created equal. Stick to well-established, reputable platforms, do your own research, and definitely avoid leaving large amounts of Bitcoin sitting on an exchange for long periods. Take custody yourself.
Okay, so be careful. Double-check addresses, understand the privacy limits, use hardware wallets, and don't leave your coins on exchanges.
Got it. So, wrapping up then, it seems Bitcoin offers this really fundamentally different way to handle money, doesn't it?
It really does.
It's global, it's decentralized, based on secure math, and it kind of puts you back in the driver's seat with your funds. And while, yeah, the tech behind it sounds complex, actually getting started seems more doable than maybe people think.
Exactly. And, we encourage everyone listening to think about how these unique aspects might apply to them. Could that borderless, decentralized nature help you somehow? Could the limited supply be interesting for your long-term saving strategy? It's worth considering.
Definitely. So what are your biggest takeaways or maybe questions you still have about Bitcoin after listening to this? Let us know. Head down to the comments section. We're trying to build a community of learners here, and your thoughts really help. Yeah, absolutely. And this was really just an introduction, a dip into the Bitcoin world. There's so much more to explore, the underlying blockchain tech, how it's evolving, different use cases.
Right.
We've put some links to resources in the show notes if you want to keep digging deeper.
Great. And if you found this deep dive helpful, maybe cleared up some confusion, please share it with someone else who might be curious about Bitcoin too.
Yeah, spread the knowledge.
And of course, don't forget to subscribe so you catch our next exploration into whatever fascinating topic we tackle next.
And maybe just one final thought to leave you with. Could a truly decentralized, borderless form of money fundamentally change how we all interact with the global economy? Bitcoin was the first big step in that conversation. What role might it end up playing in your future?